because we had those two small boys then and was pastoring a church that wasn't able to pay us very much. Well, in 1990 then I was asked to run for the Thomas County School Board because Thomas County built a new high school, and the school board members had just decided it had always been Central High School. You know, there's always been Thomasville High School, and then there was Central High School. And the folks on the school board decided we're going to build a new county high school, and we're just going to do away with the central part of it. We're just going to call it Thomas County High School. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. So everybody got fired up, mad. You know, all the alumni from Central said we want the Central name in there somewhere, and so they just decided they're going to start looking for new school board members, and they found some. I was one of them. About half of the school board turned over that year. And I ran for office. I won that first election by 8 votes. 8 votes against a 2-term incumbent. He ran against me later on, 4 years later. I beat him worse that time, and then I served 2 more terms. I actually served 14 years in the Thomas County School Board. And then I was about halfway through my 4th 4-year term when the Georgia legislature became embroiled in a redistricting controversy in 2004. I don't know if any of you keep up with this kind of stuff. But I was a pastor then of a church in Thomasville. It was First Newark Baptist Church. I'd been there about 8 years. My ministry's always been to go to churches that, for lack of a better way of saying it, somebody else has torn up. I've always gone from a larger church to a smaller church. I've never left a small church to go to a larger church. I've always left a larger church to go to a smaller church, to a church that's hurting, that's had a pastor disaster or a split or something like that. And I've always helped them heal and get back together and go again. This First Newark church that I was at was a church that the pastor had come in, and after a few years he decided on a 60 to 40% vote to sell the church. And the 40% that wanted to keep it were about 40 senior adults. And they stayed there and went to the bank and borrowed money to buy back their own church. And that's the church that I went to. And I'd been there about 8 years, and we were probably averaging at that time about a couple of hundred in worship, about 200 in worship. But, I tell everybody that everything I learned about leadership, I learned in the church. Because you work with an all-volunteer army. If you can't get people to catch a glimpse of the vision, if you can't get people to work together as a team, then you're dead in the water. And I also tell people I want to write a book one day that's how to get ahead by going backwards, because that's what it seems like I'm always doing. But that only happens to get ahead that way when God's in it. And God's been in it over and over and over again. Well, I was pastoring this church in 2004. I began thinking about running for the Georgia House of Representatives. Actually, I'd been thinking about it for a long time. For 10 years, I'd been thinking about it and praying about it. In 1994, I'd been a bivocation pastor for a while because I went to work with the Georgia Department of Corrections as the first chaplain over at the state prison in Valdosta when it opened over there in 1988. It's the first chaplain there. I ended up being a deputy warden there for several years. But while I was going through that program, working for the state, I went through a program through the University of Georgia to become a certified public manager. And when we finished that program, they invited us up to the state capitol so that Governor Zell Miller could give us our certificates and thank us. And that was done in the House chambers there at the Capitol. They brought us in that day, set us down in the House chambers, told us to wait for the governor. He'll be there in a minute. And as I waited for the governor, I started looking around, and I started thinking about the history of that place and all the decisions that had been made there. And I thought about the role of government, and it was then and there that God placed a desire in my heart to run for a state office one day. And I just kind of filed it back, and I prayed about it, and I thought about it, and I prayed about it, and I nurtured that desire for the next 10 years. Well, in 2004, then, when the legislature couldn't agree on the maps, so they had to have a federal judge come and draw them. They drew the maps, and there I was sitting right in the middle of a district that didn't have an incumbent. And I'd been watching the preliminary maps and all those things, and I told Kathy, I said, I think that we're going to end up in a district that doesn't have an incumbent. This is going to be an open seat. I've been praying about this for 10 years, and I think it's about time that we do something if that's the way it turns out. And so I was sitting in my church office one day when the final maps came out, and I saw